I'm Flic, and you're listening to Everyday Burnout Conversations. This is the honest podcast that shares burnout expertise along with the stories of others from all walks of life that strive to inspire and help you manage and avoid burnout. Now, my passion for burnout and self-care came about when I became a mental health writer who'd lost her own mental health to severe burnout. And it's an irony that's not lost on me. So get set to enjoy another great conversation, delightfully wrapped up in some wisdom, humour, and great storytelling. Enjoy. In this episode, I chat with Sophie Cliff, also known as the Joyful Coach. Sophie is a positive psychology practitioner and holds an MSc in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology. Now, Sophie founded Joy Futures, and that's a workplace wellbeing consultancy designed to help organisations bring the joy back into work. And in addition to being a brilliant coach, Sophie hosts the popular podcast Practical Positivity, and she's the author of the brilliant new book, Choose Joy. Relieve burnout, focus on your happiness, and infuse more joy into your everyday life. Epic title. In this fabulous conversation, we chat about Sophie's work and her own experiences with burnout. And Sophie also explains how embracing joy can actually help prevent burnout. And she shares some great tools from her book. So let's crack on with this lovely everyday burnout conversation. Here's Sophie Cliff. Oh, Sophie, this is such a treat to be able to chat with you today. Oh my gosh, your book is phenomenal. There's no other word for it. It's beautiful. Well done.
Thank you so much. It was honestly such a pleasure to write. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but I so loved working on it, and knowing that other people have enjoyed it or taken things from it just makes it even more special.
Oh, it's incredible. And what I loved about it was that, you know, it's a book about burnout and your story of burnout, and then how that led to you discovering and embracing joy, which is just phenomenal. So tell us a little bit about your burnout story and how it led you to kind of embark on this work that you do now.
Yeah. So I always sort of think about getting to this point of my journey, almost having a couple of different chapters. And I always like to caveat that it's really easy to tell this stuff in reverse and make it sound like everything was very linear. And, you know, this happened and then this happened and then I ended up where I am today. And I like to share that because it didn't feel like that in the process. It felt messy and it felt like 2 steps forward and 2 steps back. And I always just want to give that caveat for anyone who's listening who might be in the middle of the mess, that it's not as easy as, you know, this happened and then this happened. But essentially, you know, I spent the first decade of my career in a job that I kind of had fallen into from day dot. For as long as I can remember, I made decisions by what I thought would make, you know, other people happy or what would help me to meet society's expectations. And I got to a place where in 2015, 2016, I ticked loads of the boxes, but I still didn't feel good. So I had a great job working at the Walt Disney Company, you know, going to movie premieres and traveling the world and doing all this exciting stuff. And my partner and I had just bought our first home and we were traveling loads and we had these busy social lives. And on paper and to everyone else, it looked like things were going really, really well. But to me, what I knew was that, like, I was absolutely exhausted. I was having lots of physical symptoms that I didn't realize at the time were a symptom of burnout. I just thought, you know, these were health things, you know, digestive problems and headaches and skin issues and all of this stuff. I had quite bad anxiety. But in my mind, I was like, well, this must be a me problem. It must be that I'm not being grateful enough, or I must not, you know, I'm being too picky, or I'm being too needy, or, you know, I've got all this lovely stuff going on in my life and I don't feel good about it. And instead of seeing that as a sign that something needed to change, I kind of just used that as more ammo to beat myself up and make me feel even worse, essentially, which, you know, some other people might relate to. And I really think I would have carried on in that pattern until I got to the point of complete and utter burnout. What happened in 2016, that summer, we had a tragic bereavement in my family. We lost my young cousin Blossom, and she was only 4 at the time. And I often talk about that event as sort of like, lots of people will have an event where it's like life before and life after, and the two things feel so different. And for me, the thing that really exploded in my mind at that time was, this isn't a dress rehearsal. And, we see all those cheesy quotes on Instagram of, you only live once and you'll never get this day again. And, don't waste your time doing something that doesn't make you happy. And I would be liking all of those posts and pinning them on Pinterest boards. But I don't think I really felt the weight of that sense of, this isn't a dress rehearsal. This is like our one shot, until I had that experience. And again, very easy to tell in reverse, as and then I changed things. In reality, it took years of, dealing with that grief, dealing with PTSD, dealing with the burnout that was already bubbling amongst the surface and that was only exacerbated by that experience. But essentially, it gave me a sense of urgency that I thought, I've got to make a change here. I can't go on like this. And it almost felt like a mark of disrespect to me to be, that I had this time and I was lucky enough to have this, this time and this life and, whatever we're given. And I wasn't using it in a positive way. I was just using it to try and keep up with other people and make other people happy at the detriment of my own life and happiness and health. And that was a bit of a turning point for me. And then essentially, like I say, it took years, and it took lots of back and forth and therapy and coaching and conversations and mini periods of burnout along the way. But what I essentially decided to do was retrain. I retrained as a coach. I got very interested in positive psychology and went back to university to study a master's in that. And I set up in the work that I do now as the Joyful Coach, which is all about helping other people make those changes without necessarily having to go through the shitty bit first, without having to go through the, big life tragedy. Because, as you will know, and you will talk to so many people about, so many of us are experiencing that burnout. We might not have had this big life shift or this big change, but we might resonate with that idea of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Everything looks good on paper, but it doesn't feel good to us. And so all of the work I do now is essentially about helping people unpack and uncover what will feel good to them, what does add joy to their life, and how can we bring more of that so that we're not in that place where, we're feeling ill, we're feeling run down, we're constantly burnt out, we're constantly comparing ourselves to others.
Oh, absolutely. When I was reading the book and reading your story, Sophie, so much resonated. And, as you said, as a mark of disrespect to myself, I just wasn't even considering myself. And I tell you what, you wrote a line, it's here. And this line, when I read it in the book, shivers went through my body. And you said, every day I got up and went to work, painting a face of normalcy. But even that was only because I was too worried about what would happen if I didn't. And I thought, oh my gosh, you articulated beautifully how easy it is to just keep walking towards burnout without even realizing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so often it becomes the norm because we see other people in that space as well. And we think this is just what being an adult is, or this is just what being busy is. And what I've seen really prevalent in the last couple of years is we go, well, this is just because of the pandemic. This is just because of what we've all been through. And we make these excuses and we find these reasons and we try to convince ourselves that everyone else is feeling this way. This is the only option. This is what being, like I say, being a grown-up is. And who am I to moan? I just need to get through it. And how often, I keep seeing that meme doing the rounds again at the moment where it says, being an adult is saying, once I get through this week, things are going to quieten down. And I feel like when I was stuck in my burnout, that's what I would always be saying, well, once I get through January, then I'll feel a bit better. Or once I get to the other side of that work project, then I'll feel a little bit better. And I don't think I really believed that there was a different alternative until I started to experience it myself.
Yeah. And I also loved how you touched on the guilt factor. because I think if you're not kind of experiencing that shame where you're like, oh my God, everyone else is nailing it except me, I've got to keep quiet and just keep going. The other side of the coin is, what is wrong with me? I've got everything. Why is this not enough? Why am I so miserable? And I loved how you touched on that, because I think that's another thing that when I talk to people, I'm sure when you talk to people, that comes up, and people forget or don't realize that you can burn out doing something that you love, or you aimed for, you aimed for the stars, and you're like, oh, hang on a minute. This isn't working for me.
Yeah. And I think we've been so, like, I was going to use the word brainwashed there, and that sounds really intense, but I think we have been so indoctrinated from such a young age to believe that happiness lies on the other side of an achievement or a marriage or a job title or a certain salary or a weight loss goal, or, we're recording this second week of January, you only have to switch on the telly for 10 minutes to, be bombarded with the book this dream holiday and this year will be great, or like change this job or save this much money. And I think we don't question that because it's there from day dot, right? I notice it when I watch, films with my little niece and nephew, where we see those happily ever afters from the get-go. And so we don't challenge it. And then when we get, what on paper seems like the happily ever after, and we get the stuff that we think that we've wanted and that we've sacrificed so much for and we've hustled so hard for, then we don't feel any different, or we don't feel the way we expected to, I think it does bring a lot of guilt and shame with it. And it brings a lot of like, is there something wrong with me? Is there something missing? Have I missed, has everyone else read the manual on how to be an adult and not told me about it? Because I feel, I don't feel the way I thought I was going to feel.
Yeah, and the danger then is a lot of people, and I definitely put my hand up to this, is that instead of talking about it, instead of kind of thinking, right, I'm going to press pause, I'm going to look at all the cards on the table, what you kind of go further into it and you hide because you're just so kind of, overwhelmed trying to keep up. But also you have that shame piece where you're like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? And as you say, it's a me problem, not a problem that is to be fixed kind of from an outside point of view.
Yeah, I think we do two really dangerous things, actually. I think we do exactly what you've just said there, of we think, well, this is me and I'm going to keep this quiet and I'm going to tell everyone else, yeah, it feels great. And I'm going to post like the LinkedIn status update, or I'm going to make things look really shiny on Instagram. And that in turn makes us feel bad because it's not genuine, it's not authentic. I think the other thing we do is then we think, oh, well, it's the next thing that's going to help. So it must just be that, it's the next promotion when I'm going to feel really great, or it's when I've run that 10K that's when everything's going to fall into place. And so what we do is we're feeling burnt out, we're feeling exhausted, we're feeling disconnected, and we pile on even more pressure. And that's where I see so many clients come to me is they're like, I'm at breaking point. I can't do any more, but what I've got isn't working. So where do I start in terms of unraveling this? We just chase the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And I think for me personally, and I've definitely seen with my clients as well, that's where we end up in these places where we can't even really recognize how we got there. When I look back on like my previous career, I think I never intentionally ever sat down and thought, this is what I want to be, or this is what I want to do, or this is the impact I want to have. I just, did the degree that everyone told me I'd be best at uni. And then I got on a graduate scheme because that's what everyone else in my uni group was doing. And then I went for the promotion that the recruiter told me I should go for. And it was never about what do I want, what inspires me, what, lifts me up. It was just about let's chase the next thing and the next thing. And almost the further on in that pattern that you go, the further and further away we get from knowing what we want and knowing what will make us feel good.
It's so true. It's funny. I'm experiencing this with my son at the moment. He's 16 and just hearing him talk about what teachers are saying at school and what he should be looking to study and I'm like, but what would make you happy? What do you enjoy? Let's look at what you enjoy. And it's almost, let's face it, I'm having breakfast, I'm having dinner with this boy. Like, I have a huge influence on his life, but still there's an element of him. I see him going, oh my God, like, I guess I should do this and I should do that. And the shoulds are coming into the conversation as opposed to, what do you want? And so it's so funny, isn't it? Like, it is this societal kind of, we're just swept away with it, aren't we?
Yeah. And I think, I'm not someone who is anti-social media at all. It has brought so much to my life and it's a big part of the work that I do. But I do think that what's hard is we can see so many more shoulds than, perhaps, even if we just think about, 20 years ago when I was at school versus now, your son being there, he probably has so much more to see in terms of what success looks like and how we visualize that and, who you can compare yourself to. And so almost those limits of like how far we can go in the pursuit of, in inverted commas, success or happiness, the sky is the limit now. 20 years ago, we would only really have known what our close friends were doing or people in our town were doing. Now it's, those shoulds are just ramping up even more rapidly.
Yeah. And what I loved reading your book was when you mentioned that actually, when we're not embracing the joy in our day-to-day, it leaves a bigger gap for the comparison to slip in. And I think comparison is a big issue, isn't it? For a lot of us, regardless of your age.
Yeah. And also it's a really human thing. I think, we talk about it being as a result of social media, but it's actually hardwired into who we are as humans. We are pack animals. We do better when we work together. And so therefore, from day dot, we have evolved to compare and make sure that we don't get thrown out of the pack, that we're not sort of left behind. And I think sometimes comparison can be a useful tool because it can kind of tell us, I know for me, 5 years ago when I was thinking about changing my career, comparing myself to people who were doing things that they loved almost told me, maybe I want to change. Maybe there's something there. I think sometimes we can, in our envy, we can find some clues. But I do think that, I really, really can see a marked difference in my life that when I wasn't doing, thinking about my own joy, when I was just thinking about the achievements and the accolades and the milestones that I was collecting, I was so trapped in comparison because you would achieve something and you think, great, right, I've worked towards this next step and now we've got it. And then, like take, for example, like buying a house or, moving home, you think, great, now we've done that thing that we've been working towards for years. And then your best friend goes and buys like a bigger house, or someone else like decides that they're not going to buy a house and they're going to move to Australia or they're going to do something totally different. And when we're not making those decisions from a place of purpose or a place of joy, then we can start to think, well, is that what I should have done? Or, is that the better option? We can almost convince ourselves that there is a right way to live life and a right path to follow when, what we know in reality is that there isn't, because we're all different. We've all got different needs. We've all got different desires. But unless we're connected to those needs and desires, we're constantly going to be scanning and sort of thinking, that person looks happy. What have they got? And will that thing make me happy too?
Oh, that's going to resonate hard with a few people, including myself. Oh my gosh, it's so true. It's so true. And so what's the difference then, Sophie, between happiness and joy?
Yeah. So the best way that I like to sort of describe this, and there is a difference, we know from scientific research that they are two completely separate constructs, which I think we often get mixed up. But happiness tends to be more circumstantial. So it tends to be that we're happy because something has happened. So we're happy because it's Christmas, or we're happy because we're going on holiday tomorrow, or we're happy because someone sent us a nice text. So something in our life happens and that creates a sense of happiness, but it's not necessarily something that, is always there. It fluctuates. It comes and goes. And there's the Dalai Lama puts it in a nice way in that he sort of says happiness lands on you like a butterfly and then departs. And so, we might get up one day and have a really happy day, and then the next day, we're back in our sort of usual rhythms and routines. Joy, on the other hand, what the research tells us is that it's more of like an approach or an attitude. So it's something that we can cultivate. So the reason why I'm really passionate about joy, and the reason why that's what I focus on and not happiness, is it's something we have some control over. And I think one of the downfalls with trying to achieve the happily ever after is that we don't have that much say in it. You know, all of these other circumstances have got to align for us to experience that happiness, whereas joy we can cultivate. It's a practice, it's a muscle that we can sort of build. The other thing with joy is that it can coexist with other emotions. So we can be grieving and still find moments of joy, or we can be burnt out and still find little pockets of joy. Or, you know, we can feel really sad. We can be having a sad day, and then a friend will text us and we'll think, you know, that's a point of connection. Or, you know, you might be having a stressful day and see a rainbow, and that might bring you some joy. And so it can coexist. It doesn't have to almost have this clear slate in the same way that happiness does. You know, it's very rare that we would say, you know, on a day when we are grieving, for example, that we feel happy, but we might say, I'm grieving, and also my kid said something really funny and that brought me a moment of joy. Or, you know, I've had a terrible day at work, but I came home and my partner had cooked my favorite meal, and there was a little bit of joy in that moment. And I think that's the difference. Joy is more sort of about noticing, about being present, about cultivating some of that gratitude for what is there, and about experiencing the good stuff. And the best way I can sort of describe joyful living, because as I'm sure you will understand, you know, a lot of the time talking about joy online, I get the sort of, well, this is just toxic positivity rhetoric. And I say, no, this isn't about having to be positive, having to be happy 24/7. For me, joyful living is about giving as much attention to the good stuff as we do to the bad stuff. And as humans, we are hardwired to focus on the bad stuff. We have already got that covered. We're professionals. We do not need any extra training in how to worry, how to spot risks, how to focus on the things that could go wrong. That is, you know, we've evolved to be experts at that. What we're not very good at is noticing the compliments, or being present in the joyful moment, or like feeling the gratitude for all of the good stuff that we've got in our life. And for me, that's what joy is. It's turning the volume up on that stuff, not eliminating the bad, not, you know, making our lives perfect, just bringing more harmony between the two, essentially.
Oh, just beautiful. It really is. And it's interesting because I'm sure you find this with your clients. When you're really like deep into burnout, I was someone who I would not have been able to tell you what brought me joy. You know, yeah. I wouldn't have been able to pinpoint anything. And I think that just goes to show how the two go hand in hand, like how, you know, when you don't have any joy, that's when you're kind of moving away from your values and who you are and what you want in life. So when someone comes to you, how do you help them kind of start to look for those joyful moments that they can start to kind of tuck into their pocket?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is to start small. So I think, again, somewhat like we often trip up because we think of joy and happiness as the same thing. So if you're deep in burnout, you're thinking, I can't get to the point where I have this day where I feel great as soon as I wake up and I have this lovely day and I'm seeing all the people that I love. You know, that feels so far away. But if we remember that joy is about noticing those small things, that gives us a way to start. And there are two things that I always recommend with people. One is gratitude, because the research tells us that the most joyful people have a regular gratitude practice. So starting to notice, what in your life are you grateful for? What in your life would you miss if it was gone tomorrow? Because there is so much stuff that we take for granted. And that, I think, is the only upside of experiencing a loss, is you realize it's the simple stuff you miss when that person is gone. It's not like the big holidays or the weddings or anything like that. It's the little text from them. It's the way they giggled. It's like, you know, the small little moments. And so starting with that gratitude, what are you glad you've got? What would you miss if it was gone? And then the other little phrase that I often share is to lean into what feels good. And it sounds so simple, like, you know, to do more of the stuff that makes you feel good. But that is actually so radical in our, you know, society, when we're taught that there is value in the hustle and the hard stuff. And we celebrate the people who've pushed through and been resilient and had this grit and determination. And we forget that there's real value in leaning into the stuff that feels good. There's real value in just going, actually, I'm going to make myself the type of breakfast that I want to eat, instead of thinking I have to have this super healthy, I don't know, oatmeal because someone's told me that that's how I start the day. For years, I ate a breakfast that I hated. I didn't take any pleasure in it, but it was because I'd read, this is what I should be eating, or this is how I should be starting my day. Or, I'd get up, I'd wake up in the morning, I'd spring out of bed because I'd read all these books about the most productive people are, feet on the floor and they're downstairs and they're cracking on with their day. And actually what feels good to me is an extra 10 minutes in bed and the cat jumps on my lap and I either do 10 minutes of journaling or I read my book for 10 minutes. And that is a little moment of pleasure, a little moment of joy to start the day. But we so often deny ourselves those things because, like I say, we have been told there isn't value in them. We've been told that, the value is in the productivity, in the being super healthy, in the making the positive changes. And actually, the research doesn't support that. The research tells us that the more joy we have in our lives, the better our relationships are, the better our health is, the more likely we are to take care of our health, the more successful we're likely to be at work, the more productive we can be. And so it's almost like a bit of a mindset shift and a bit of a gear change to almost give ourselves permission to try doing life a different way and to try going, okay, I'm going to experiment. And what about if I do just, lean into what feels good for a week? What about if I just give myself some of those moments of joy and pleasure and then notice what happens as a result?
Oh, because what's fabulous about that is that it's taking self-care off the bloody to-do list. How, as you say, you had that breakfast for how many years? And certainly this time of year, we're seeing, as you say, all the adverts on the telly, all the Instagram, all the things, self-care then becomes something else to do on the to-do list. It becomes oppressive. And whereas when you say lean into what feels good, oh, okay, I'll do that. It's so, it becomes natural, doesn't it? I love that.
Yeah. And I think that's where that's such a gear change in our brain as well, is to trust ourselves rather than to trust that someone else has all the answers. And it was something that I was so passionate about when we were writing the book. Every time I met with my editor, I said, I don't want this to be a typical self-help book. I read loads of self-help and personal development books and I love the genre. I hate how much stick it gets, but I do notice that there are so many books that will tell you, if you do it this way, this is the plan, this is the guide, this is how to do it. And it's on you to follow these steps and then your life will be great. And then if for whatever reason you can't follow those steps, I always remember, I can never remember whether it's the 5 a.m. club or the miracle morning, but I read one of those books that was all about if you wake up at 5 a.m. and do these 6 things before everyone else in the house is up, you'll be super productive. And I remember reading, it said, this has worked for millions of people and changed millions of lives. And I thought, great. And I, tried to follow the instructions in that book to the letter. And I tried getting up at 5 a.m. and what would happen was I'd often snooze my alarm. So I'd start the day feeling guilty that I'd failed, before I'd even got out of bed. Or if I did manage it, I'd get to 3 p.m. and be absolutely knackered and be cranky with my husband when I got home and feel grumpy that I didn't get as much stuff done at work. And instead of sort of looking at that and thinking, maybe that's just not the right approach for me, instead I internalized it as, I mustn't have as much willpower as other people. I mustn't be as motivated. I mustn't want this as much. And I think we do that all the time. We think about making a change. We think about, wanting to do something different. We look externally. We try and find someone else's plan or guide or book. And then we try to take on their plan. And when it doesn't work, that almost feeds our burnout in a way, because we think, well, I've tried to make a change and it didn't work. So this must just be who I am. Whereas that intuitive approach of leaning into what feels good, it reminds us that we are the experts on us. So I know I'm never going to feel good if I have to wake up at 5 a.m. unless I'm going to the airport to catch a flight, and then I will feel great. But that's the only circumstance where waking up at 5 a.m. is ever going to feel good to me. But what I do know is, like I might be really productive come 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. And so I lean into doing my best work then, and because that feels really good. Or I feel really good if, I'm not someone who loves going to the gym and having that super structured exercise, but I know I feel so much better if I get out for a walk every day. And because that feels good to me, I'm way more likely to sustain that and to keep that as a habit than if I, was sort of saying to myself, I've got to go to this aerobics class 3 times a week, and I do that for 1 week and then forget all about it. And so the research really does back up that leaning into the joy, leaning into what feels good, that's what helps make like a lasting change, because we're listening to ourselves, we're listening to our own intuition, we're getting to know ourselves better instead of almost thinking that someone else has got all the answers for us.
Oh, that's amazing. You're so right. Because I don't know anyone who has felt worse for tuning into themselves, for being present and doing what feels right for themselves. No one has ever come out going, well, that was a waste of time and I feel awful now. It's so true. Yeah.
But we don't trust ourselves because there is this whole, multi-billion-dollar economy that runs on making us feel like we have to listen to other people, or making us feel like someone else knows better than us. And I think that's why I always say, like I wrote in the book, that choosing joy or like chasing joy is a radical act. And it's quite a rebellious thing to do, because it goes against like all of those billions of dollars that are spent, like I said earlier, at the time of recording this, it's January. As I look out of the window, it's not stopped raining once here today. It's so grey. And there's all of this advertising happening that is telling people like, book the holiday or do this or do that, like it's buying into our like collective misery that comes in that post-Christmas come down. And I keep just trying to remind people, like, actually, you're allowed to find January joyful. You're allowed to do things that you enjoy in January, or February or March. It's not reserved just for the summer holidays or for Christmas or, for these patterns when it fits a marketing beat. We're allowed to choose it whenever we want. And that is quite rebellious in a way, to say, actually, I'm going to enjoy January. I'm going to lean into all the things that make me feel good. Or I'm going to, rather than following this strict plan, or rather than following this career pathway, I'm going to lean into what feels good to me. That's radical, and it's really rebellious. And I think there's something fun about that.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? Because I was just texting a friend before we started chatting. We were meant to meet on Wednesday and she can't make it, and we've rescheduled a few times. And I'm like, it's okay, it's January. We're allowed to be slow. We can be slow in February if we want. We will meet up when it works out well. And she was like, oh my gosh, thank you. When actually, that's kind of a real sign of the times. We shouldn't be like going all hell for leather into January thinking, right, this is the year I'm going to make it, the X, Y, and Z. We're allowed to slow down. But you're so right. Find those little pockets of joy, because there's nothing wrong with, slowing down, taking our time and starting the year off and finding those little elements of joy.
Yeah. And so often those like premeditated rhythms only make us feel more burnt out, right? I have absolutely no doubt that by the end of this week, so many people will be entering that phase of burnout, because we've had December where we are pushed to go, 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 even though it's cold and dark and our bodies are like, no, I need the rest. Like we push through it because that's what we're told, is like Christmas should be this busy period. And then we get to January and it's like, right, quickly switch out of like relaxation mode and get back to work and set your goals and go, go, go. And be in the gym every day and wake up at 5 a.m. And there's all this noise, and then we crash. And, that's where we get to that point in mid-January where we think, I can't sustain this. And there's still 6, 7, 8 weeks of winter left to go. And we're feeling tired and we're feeling slow. And again, I see so often with my clients that those burnouts are almost exacerbated by the fact that we're not listening to our own rhythms and routines. We are following this sort of like premeditated structure that, again, helps to like sell things and keep the economy rolling, but doesn't necessarily help us as humans.
Oh gosh, it's so true, isn't it? It's so true. And I think, how many of us are just, well, because then we hit that point where we're like, oh, nothing has worked. And then that's when it's very easy to step into that territory of self-loathing and the imposter syndrome, the inner critic. Oh my gosh, they've got a megaphone and they're talking. And it's that, they're tough days to navigate, aren't they?
Yeah. And I think that's when we can start to feel really vulnerable to that noise as well. And that's where, when I think back, that for me would always be like the catalyst of then I'd start to feel a bit run down. Then I'd start to have more of the health symptoms. Then I wouldn't be sleeping as well. So therefore I would feel even worse the next day. And it's this like negative, like fulfilling cycle, isn't it? That almost the less we listen to ourselves, the less we can listen, the less like we feel connected. And that, I think, is where that, we can really hit that place of burnout where it's taken its toll on our relationships, on our work, on our health. It's not just a sense of feeling like I'm a bit run down or I'm a bit tired or I'm a bit disconnected. It becomes this huge thing that, takes a period of recovery to bounce back from.
Yeah, the ripple effect of burnout is huge, isn't it? And sadly, you don't even know you're in it. It kind of creeps in through the back door, and then it's just to the point, because like you, I kind of blamed all my physical symptoms on other things. I was like, oh God, it must be perimenopause. Oh God, it must be this. It must be that. I just refused to almost consider burnout. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because joy, you say that joy really does prevent burnout. So joy in being present and being in tune with yourself. And I guess burnout really is teamed up with when you're, removed from yourself. And that's when imposter syndrome come in. And that's when, all the negative inner talk comes in. I loved your little, I'm actually going to be adopting this. I loved your little tactic for tackling imposter syndrome. Could you share that? Because I was like, oh, Sophie, I'm doing this.
Yeah. So imposter syndrome is something, again, it's totally normal. It's something we all get. I write in the book about, Adele saying she has it and Michelle Obama saying she has it. And I think we often see imposter syndrome as something that we see it as information that we're doing something wrong or that we're not qualified yet or that we haven't made enough changes or that we are somehow going to be caught out. And actually, it's just a part of being a human. It's just a part of trying to make any sort of change. And so a tool that I found really, really helped me, and it's probably my most recommended tool that I share with everyone, is to keep an achievement log and to write done lists instead of to-do lists. So they're two separate tools, but essentially cover the same thing, which is to get us to focus on what we have done, get us to focus on what we have achieved, instead of constantly thinking about what we haven't got done. And so I really recommend, especially because we're at the start of a year, setting up an achievement log. So I keep mine on a Google Doc because I just find that I used to do it in a notebook and I'd always find an excuse of like, oh, I've left that notebook at the office, or, it's downstairs and I'm not going to get a chance. And so a Google Doc you can access via your phone or your laptop or whatever. And at the end of every week, I just write, week commencing 9th of January or whatever it is, and write down what you have achieved that week. And it doesn't have to be big things. It doesn't have to be sexy, exciting things. It's often very repetitive. It's often, like in my life, it's like, had this many coaching calls, wrote a newsletter email, shared a podcast episode, and it repeats and it's similar every week. But what it does is it changes our focus from, so often on a Friday, we close our laptops or we leave the office or, however we end our week. And we spend Friday evening thinking about all the things we didn't get done on the to-do list. We think, I never sent that email. I never got back to that person. I'm going to have to find some time next week to do that other thing. What we never ever do is go, I've had a really great week this week. Look at what I have achieved. I did 95% of the things on the to-do list, and that is worth celebrating. And so for me, that achievement log, or similarly, you can do it at the end of the day, writing a done list instead of a to-do list. But the more emphasis we can put on what we are achieving, the progress we are making, the more we can start to feel like, we're building confidence, we're building momentum, we're making progress. And it also really helps during any of those moments when imposter syndrome might flare. So, if you have a one-to-one with your boss or you have a performance review, I used to find that my head would go and I'd be like, what do I do? I can't really remember. I don't know what my job is. And having that like hard written evidence, being able to see what I've been spending my time on almost helps us to fight that little voice and helps us to go, I am doing the thing. I am taking action. And I think sometimes we can see imposter syndrome as that sort of like scared little kid that we might have been on the playground, and we can see they're just trying to keep us safe. They don't want us to get into trouble. They don't want us to, be humiliated. And having that achievement log or having that evidence written down helps us to go to them like, look, it's okay. Like, we're doing the thing. We are safe. Like, we're not the scared kid on the playground anymore. We're grown up and we're making these changes and we're making things happen. And that is so powerful when that imposter syndrome strikes.
Oh, that's such a lovely perspective to have. You're so right. Like, it is like a little kind of, little kid on the playground going, oh, I got a minute. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I feel imposter syndrome can weigh very heavy on me. Whereas the moment you're kind of, creating done lists as opposed to the constant to-do list, and you're starting to look at the things that you're like, oh, actually, I did really well there. That actually as an energy feels very light. And the irony, I can remember chatting to my coach and she said, honestly, Flic, if you were to nourish yourself and do less, the irony is you'd achieve more. And I can remember thinking, oh, what? No. But it's so true, because when you've been used to going at a back-breaking pace, it feels very strange to slow down. But the moment you slow down, the moment you start to lean into your joy, look after yourself a bit better, the energy's lighter, Yeah.
Yeah. And we talk about in positive psychology, the reason for that. So one of my sort of like personal heroes or idols is a lady called Barbara Fredrickson, who was a social psychologist and researcher. And her research focused on, she was really curious as to why we experience positive emotions from an evolutionary perspective, because we know why we experience negative emotions. It's because they trigger responses in our body that help us to trigger that survival mode. So when you feel anxious or worried, our brain will go and, trigger the fight, flight, freeze response, which in turn sends adrenaline to certain parts of our bodies. It makes us hyper aware. It helps us to spot risks. So we know that there is like a biological evolutionary reason to experience negative emotions, because they help trigger the survival response. And what Barbara Fredrickson was interested in was, well, why do we experience positive emotions? Like, what's the evolutionary reason for us to experience joy or excitement or passion or whatever it might be? And she came up with something called the broaden and build theory, which is basically what we can see now from like cognitive imaging and some of the technology we have, is that when we experience a negative emotion, parts of our brain close off to allow us to focus and meet that survival response. The opposite happens when we experience a positive emotion. So it opens up our brain. We can access more of our cognitive functioning when we experience a positive emotion, which in turn helps us to broaden our thinking, because we can access more of our brain, and in turn build new resources. So, when you are feeling happy or joyful, it's likely that you're going to be more creative. You'll come up with more ideas, which will give you more solutions to problems, which builds new resources. Or when you're feeling joyful, you might be more likely to reach out and connect to other people, which allows you to build a stronger network. Or when you're feeling good, you might be more likely to, eat the things that really nourish you, which gives you more energy. And it's a positive upwards spiral. So the more we feel good, the more access we have to that full like spectrum of our knowledge, the full cognitive functioning, which in turn makes life easier. And what I love about that broaden and build theory is it is that positive upward spiral. So we can start really, really small. And I think that's so encouraging when you're in the thick of that burnout. Is we sometimes feel like, oh, we have to get this new perfect routine nailed, or we have to change everything to battle the burnout. I have to start a new job, or I have to change my career, or I have to move location. And actually, that theory tells us if we just start prioritizing those little moments of joy, we open ourselves up, we're more creative, we're more connected, we're more, socially minded. We have access to all of these resources which can help to make us start feeling better. And just that tiny, I always often talk about it as like the domino effect. So you just have to push over the first domino, and that kind of sets the positivity in motion, because the more you broaden that thinking, the more resources you build, which in turn makes it easier for you to access joy or creativity or fun or whatever that other positive emotion is. And I think I wanted to share that because people had said to me, similar to what your coach said to you, of like, if you just lean into the ease, you'll get more done. And I was like, yeah, but no, that's not how, like, that logically doesn't sound right to me. And so the like logical part of my brain would resist it. And I'd be like, I just need to find the perfect routine, or I just need to find the right approach, or I just need to, find the perfect diet, or whatever it is I was trying to change. And as soon as I learned about the broaden and build theory, I was like, that makes sense. As when we are trying to force ourselves to do something that makes us feel bad, we are making ourselves less creative, less smart, less capable. Whereas when we are in that throes of feeling good, all of that stuff opens up to us. And that's why life feels easier. That's why our work comes more naturally to us. That's why people who report being more joyful have more successful careers or higher IQs or better health, is because of that connection.
Oh my gosh, what an incentive to make those baby steps. You're so right. There's logic there. So it makes sense as to why start small, baby steps, keep going. I love the domino visual, because, what's the alternative? Yes, we can carry on with our own, negative way of working, but where's that landed us? It's not worked. So, oh my God, that's amazing, Sophie. I love that.
That was a real game changer moment for me when I learned about that, because I think instinctively lots of us know that if we feel good, like, we do better, but it goes against the logic that we're sold. It goes against, like I say, this society that we live in that tells us the hardest working people are the most valuable, or the people who've like been through the most have got like the most value to add. And actually for me, that reminder, it's a nice one to just think, it's okay if like I've had 95% of my day has been hard and tough, and I'm going through a hard season right now. That 5% still makes a difference. And I think how I used to think when I was in the throes of burnout, someone would say, why don't you get out for a walk on your lunchtime? And I think, well, what's the point? Because I'm going to come back and I'm still going to have to do all this work, and I might as well just sit here and eat my lunch at my desk and push through. And, a half-hour walk during my lunch hour isn't going to change my life. It doesn't feel big enough to be worthwhile prioritizing. But actually that half-hour walk, that bit of fresh air, might have been just what I needed to come back and have fresh eyes for a project, which helped me to do better at work, which helped to build my confidence, which meant that I went home and, spoke to my husband in a really loving way instead of a really grumpy way. And it's this, like you say, that domino of one small thing can change the day. And we do that in both sides. I'm sure everyone listening has got an experience of where they might have woken up feeling completely fine, but then you miss the bus or the train, and then, you get to work a little bit late, and we start to tell ourselves, I'm having a bad day. And we look for the evidence that backs up we're having a bad day. But we can do the opposite. We can say, I'm going to start the day with the 10 minutes, of joy, and let that be a catalyst for a good day and a positive day.
Oh my goodness. Fantastic. What little pockets of joy do you embrace these days, Sophie?
I always say it sounds laughably simple. And I think that's one of the lovely things about joy, is it is so available to us. It is the really small things. And so for me, it is those 10 minutes in the morning. I always say, if the cat jumps onto the bed and she chooses to sit on my lap rather than my husband's, I'm like, this is a good day. This is going to be a great day. But, having those 10 minutes or, 15 minutes with my cup of tea, reading my book, taking it slow, I really love that. I find so much joy. I've got 2 little nieces and a nephew, and I think children are just fantastic for joy because they are so in it. They're so present. They're not worrying about, what they're having for dinner or who's going to pay the bill. They are just like one more push on the swing or one more story before bedtime. So I love that. I find a lot of joy in being outdoors. And that is something that 5 years ago I would have laughed at because I thought like, I'm 100% a city girl and I need to be go, go, go. But I love 10 minutes outside, the fresh air, the noticing, here in the UK at the moment, the days are getting gradually a little bit lighter, and noticing that brings me a lot of joy. And I think it really is for me, those simple things. It's the stuff that if it was to be gone tomorrow, I would miss. And that's what I always come back to. It's the people in my life. It's having the time and space to do the things that I enjoy, whether that's reading or journaling or going for a little walk. It's just finding the small bits of pleasure. And of course, there's joy in the big stuff too of, going on a holiday or planning, some big thing or a big work project. But for me, it is just trying to find as many little moments where I can be present throughout the day and go, this is a nice moment. And it's not 24 hours a day. I can tell you that. I definitely still get grumpy and, think, I can't really be bothered to do that thing. But the more attention that I give to the good stuff, the better everything else feels.
Well, I think this is what's so lovely when you say in the book, joy coexists with other emotions. There's no pressure there to be happy all the time or to be fulfilled all the time. Just be human and just be present. And there's little bits there to get you through. And amazing. It's an absolutely incredible book, Sophie. I loved reading it. It's for my copy. It can't be lent out to anyone because it's full of highlighter and flags and turned pages. And it was an absolute joy to read. It really was. So well done. Well done. It's beautiful. I hope you had fun writing it.
I really did. And like I said earlier on, the one thing I wanted was for people to be able to do what you've just said, which is to make it their own, because I'm a big believer, what brings me joy is going to be different to what brings you joy. And what that looks like for someone listening is going to be different. There is no one size fits all approach. There is no tick off these 10 things and you'll live your, joyfully ever after. It's instead about getting to know ourselves and getting to know who we are. And I didn't have the tools for that 5 or 6 years ago. And that was why I was outsourcing so much of my decision making to other people, because I didn't know, like you said before, we might go, what does bring me joy? I'm not quite sure. I couldn't have answered that question a little while ago. And so that was the fun part of creating the book, was thinking, what are the tools? This is not about me telling you, here's how to do joy. It's about me giving you the tools that are going to help you to figure that out for yourself, because that's when it sticks, is when it's this is my decision. This is what feels good to me, instead of trying to keep up with someone else's rules.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think, if you were to go back 5 years ago, would the Sophie then ever think she would be the Sophie she is now? Do you ever think, oh my God, that was a turnaround?
Definitely. And, I found during the Christmas and New Year period, I've been having a clear out at home, and I found some old journals from goals that I was setting in 2017 or 2018 and, dreaming about the future. And so much of that stuff has come to life and has changed in my life. And it's not been, and I almost feel, going back to that word guilt, I sometimes feel a bit guilty and I have to justify this, but I shouldn't. But it hasn't felt like a huge hustle or a push or I'm going to work every hour to change my career. And I think, don't get me wrong, it hasn't all been sunshine and roses. I left my corporate job about 3 months before the pandemic started, and that was all a load of good fun. And there's been, challenging, tricky bits to making these changes. But it hasn't felt when I think back to my old career and my old life kind of before making some of these changes, everything felt like a struggle. Everything felt like pushing water up a hill, and it took so much effort. And that is what would cause those Sunday scaries, was thinking, I haven't had enough time to recharge. I haven't had enough time to replenish. And then tomorrow I've got to get back to lugging all of this stuff that feels so heavy. And I think that is one thing I would offer up, is when it's right, it feels light, it feels good. And like I say, not all the time, like we still have to do things that, we all have responsibilities and boundaries and things that we have to do that, aren't as joyful as we would like. But I would say the majority of my life now feels like, joyful and easeful and right, rather than feeling like I'm trying to fit myself in somewhere where I don't belong. And I think that for me was the biggest reflection looking back on 5 years ago. And, so much of this stuff being a pipe dream was, I think I believed it was going to be really, really hard and I was going to have to build up to it. And I think I stayed in burnout for longer than I perhaps needed to, because I was so scared of like the energy it was going to take to shift it. And, everything we've just said there about that broaden and build theory, actually, it's those tiny changes. It's those little things. It's the leaning into what feels good. That's how we do this in like a gentle and softer approach, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's interesting, when I first started trying to recover from burnout, looking back, I definitely tried to overachieve it. I was trying to move so fast and far away from burnout that I was using the same energy that landed me in burnout in the first place. And I think you're so right. Like, if we can just kind of move slower and start to build up those moments of joy and those positive emotions, and it's stepping towards that, as opposed to, you can't kind of recover the same way that you landed in burnout.
Yeah. And I think it's just knowing that it is possible to do it another way, because I don't think I necessarily knew that. I think I just thought, this is going to be a hard thing. And I know I can't stay here, but getting to that place feels so far away. And actually a reminder that like there's joy in the process as well. It's not just once we've made those changes, we can take the most joyful route to recovering from burnout.
Absolutely. And it's so funny because obviously I read your book, and then my favorite part was the conclusion. I mean, I was like, oh, it feels like such a powerful manifesto. It was amazing, because within 2 pages, you have these beautiful words and sentences, and just kind of like, this is what we need to be doing. And they're gentle and nurturing and encouraging, but my goodness, do they have some power behind them. And I think, oh my gosh, you're doing it, Sophie. I just can't wait for more people to find your book. I really can't, because it's, I'm sure, like you, I see so many people cruising towards burnout and they don't even realize it. And I know what that feels like. I did that myself. But this book's set to really help a lot of people out there. It's amazing.
Oh, I really hope so. And I hope if nothing else, it makes people feel a little bit less alone in that, because I think, when I think back to being in that position that we talked about before, where I was thinking, I should be more grateful for this, or I should feel a different way, that's a really lonely place to be. And I think, if anything, if it just gives some people permission to go, it's okay that I feel like this, and there are things that I can do, then that feels like a job well done.
Yes. And a lovely reminder, you say, like, don't shrink to fit in, take up space, like, embrace your values, be you. I love that. It's beautiful. It really is. So this has been such a treat talking to you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. It's really brightened. Like I said, it's a really grey day here. And, I've just talked about how I love to get outside every day. I don't think I'm going to manage it today. So this has been my little moment of joy for the afternoon. Thank you.
Sometimes just opening the window, bit of fresh air.
Yeah, get a bit of fresh air.
Calm the nervous system a little bit.
Yeah. I'm thinking the amount of layers I'd need to tackle that. Maybe, this can be my moment of joy for today.
Oh, fantastic. I love it. Well, Sophie, at the end of all of my conversations with guests, I've been just asking some simple, quick fire questions, because everyone answers differently. So if you're up for it,
definitely.
On your dodgy, tough days, do you opt for move your body or move the remote?
Move the body. I spent a lot of years moving the remote. And, it's funny, I don't watch that much television anymore, because I love reading and I prefer that like escapism, mostly because I'm one of these people that has a bit of a smartphone addiction. And it's, a reminder that even the experts, even the people that know all of this stuff, don't have it perfectly. And if I watch the telly, all I'm doing is scrolling Instagram and scrolling Twitter and checking the news. And so for me, I always try and put my favorite podcast on, put the earphones in, get outside and get a bit of fresh air.
Oh, fabulous. Now, bag of almonds or bag of Maltesers?
Oh, bag of Maltesers. Absolute chocolate fiend.
Fabulous. Ask for help or happy to hermit?
Ask for help. And I think I'm definitely extroverted, so I definitely get my energy from other people. So the hermiting strategy doesn't come into play for me a lot, but I'm also really lucky. I'm very close with my mum and my sister. And so I feel like when you've got a couple of trusted people, that asking for help is easier to do than if you don't. So I'm very lucky in that regard.
Oh, fabulous. And lastly, what is the one self-compassionate thing you're going to do today for yourself that your future self will thank you for?
It's going to be resting. So we talked just before we jumped on the call that I'm very heavily pregnant at the moment, and I'm learning a lot about my own limitations and not just being able to push through. And I'm having to practice a lot of what I preach and lean into what I need. And so, it will be definitely doing a bit of resting this afternoon and having an early night, I think.
Oh, perfect. Well, rest up, darling, because, oh my goodness, you have created this incredible book and you're doing amazing work out in the world, and you certainly deserve a rest and enjoy these last few moments before the calm, before the storm.
Yeah. It's a very weird feeling. I know you will know that, sort of like looking out on the precipice of the unknown and what's to come.
I know, and it's so funny. And then the baby arrives, and you're like, oh my God, I feel like I've always had you. It's such a fascinating experience. And then you're like, well, I don't know how I survived in life without you. Like, I've always been here. So it's very interesting and so exciting. I wish you lots of love and luck.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me.
Okay, it's been great chatting to you. And I'll put in the show notes where people can find you and your social media and your website and a link to this brilliant book. So good stuff.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, Sophie. Take care. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Everyday Burnout Conversations. Take a peek at the show notes for any links to items discussed today. And if you want to continue the burnout conversation, you can find me on social media at Flic Taylor Writes, or you can head to my website, flictaylor.com, if you're curious and want to learn more on what it's like to work with me one-to-one. So in the meantime, rest up, don't forget to take good care of you, and bye for now.